What a difference a day makes. I'm on the island of Nolsoy with Tórshavn, the capital and where the British anchorage was during the war. To see the eastmost of the radar stations that was constructed during the war. The first curious structure we come across on this site, which is really key to interpreting its function as a defensive site, is situated just on this little rocky outcrop. We can see a well-established path leading up to it, and I don't know if you can start to pick out now, but there's some concrete at the top. This was one of two light anti-aircraft positions around this site. So just like many of the remote sites around the Faroes, they were wholly responsible for their own defence, certainly in the short term. And this radar station, being at the southernmost tip on the eastern approaches to the capital Tórshavn and the anchorage there, may have been one of the first sites to detect and be able to return fire against approaching enemy aircraft, because 200 miles in that way is Shetland, and a bit further on than that, under 300 miles, was occupied Norway. As I say, there are two of these positions in sight. Each one would have had a steel post in the centre, on top of which would have been a rudimentary mounting, most likely for a Bren gun. We can see it's constructed out of concrete, so we have corrugated iron has been used to form the inner circumference, and then around the outside of that are natural stones and cement have been poured. While the bottom is filled with dirt at the moment, it may have been about 4 feet deep, as I say, with some mounting bracket or set into the concrete that central post for the anti-aircraft gun position. So very well sited down here, just behind the lighthouse keepers buildings here, and as I say, we have the lighthouse here, and any ships entering the anchorage at Tórshavn from the south would have approached up this channel here. So that's the first real clue as to the defensive nature of some of these structures on Nolsoy. So before we go up onto the plateau where the radar station was, there's one more little building that I'd like to show you, and it's just up ahead. And here it is, looking like it's been reasonably crudely constructed. But this is quite often what we find with this wartime economy concrete, where the aggregate is larger and takes up a greater proportion than we'd find with other structural concrete. It's been cast. We can see the wooden planks on the side, and the top was probably just hand carved, and it sits just behind the lighthouse keepers' buildings. These are probably where the small section or troop of troops manning the site would have been. And to all intents and purposes, it looks like an air raid shelter. If we notice, the front is higher and wider than the main structure. This is normally because these would be covered in earth to provide additional protection against shrapnel and small arms fire. But in this case, because there really isn't any topsoil to use, or it's very hard to strip off, it's unlikely that this would have had it, and there's certainly no evidence down here of anything having slipped off, of it ever having been used. And quite unusually, it's had retrofitted. It's had a little porch. Otherwise, this generally wouldn't have been covered. The entrance would just have been in both sides. And if we go inside, we can see how this was constructed. And you may recognise, even though you can't see me very well, but this is an Anderson shelter. So they've used the corrugated iron of an Anderson shelter, reasonably readily available, certainly from War Office supplies, I imagine, with the sort of the concrete waistline at the bottom, and then that sort of wriggly tin. And ordinarily, we would think of this as an air raid shelter, and indeed it may be. It may have served the purpose of an air raid shelter for the Coast Guard crews, or the lighthouse keeper, possibly, and their families. It may have served as an air raid shelter, because by putting a radar station here and by having a lighthouse, you're making yourself a greater target for attack. Or what it may have been is it may have served as a small magazine. As I say, all the arms and ammunition to defend this site would have had to be stored here. Each soldier or aircrew that would be here would have had their own personal weapon with an allocation of ammunition, as well as the 2 light anti-aircraft guns, of which we've seen the first emplacement. So this may well have served as an air raid shelter, or as a small magazine from the change from civilian to military use. So there we have it. We'll now make our way up on top of the hill, and we'll start having a look at some of the technical buildings and technical function of this site. Made it to the main technical building on site. So I imagine this is where the receive transmit set was operated from. The roof, and we have a look inside, there is effectively no roof. It would have been a wooden roof. That's been covered up in modern times. There's this little concrete annex to the rear and to the back of the building. Over here is the second of those light anti-aircraft gun positions. But let's take a step back and have a look at this structure. So we have 2 light anti-aircraft gun positions. We know that they were reasonably well sited for attacking low-flying or approaching aircraft. This would have been constructed, this may have been one of the earlier radar stations to be constructed. And while, yes, resources were tight, there was a certain amount of protection that had to be afforded to the equipment, to the buildings, and more importantly to the capability to keep that early warning radar functional. And we can see here how they've essentially constructed it to provide a certain amount of protection from blast and from small arms fire or anti-aircraft or aircraft cannon. So we've got the earth bank, but if we also look at the building itself, it has been skirted, if you like. The bottom 2/3 of it have been increased in thickness. So increasing in thickness would give them resistance up to larger caliber weapons, and certainly most of the equipment would be in those lower levels, so not effectively not wasting concrete and protecting the top makes sense. And then the fact that it was also piled up with earth, which in fact looks like turf. So if we look around us here, so soil is mostly waterlogged turf, but we can see where the turf has been stripped back. And in fact, most of this turf being stripped back probably fueled the Coast Guard station for things like cooking and heating. But if we look here, instead of it being earth banks, we can see the lumps still, the lumps and tufts of the turf that has been cut and piled up here. So it's been surrounded by turfs, and that was certainly no easy feat to give it a certain amount of protection. And other than that, it's relatively unremarkable. It does look like a number of other buildings at the radar stations around the islands. Although this one, having this skirt, it's the first time I've seen that extra protection. So large window or vent on this side, and that would have looked out, as I say, to our light anti-aircraft gun position. And then moving around to effectively what was the front of the seaborne side, there's another window or aperture there. Unlikely to be for observation per se, more likely to be just for light into the building, or they may have been fitted with a wooden frame and louvers to allow ventilation. So let's have a look inside and see what we can identify. So very dark in here now that the windows have been blocked up. So we can see it's been used as a bit of a sheep pen. There's a net for food there. So here's this small concrete annex that we saw from the outside. So from this side we can see there is a hole in the roof. We can go out and have a look and see what that before. There's also two holes. There's a hole either side. So it's possible that the radar equipment was on the roof of that concrete annex, and to save material, time, resources, this part of the building was roofed just in timber or corrugated iron. In the centre of the room is this concrete plinth. So we typically call these M&E or mechanical and electrical plinths. So things like generators, compressors, or other sort of electromechanical equipment would be housed here. Although there are no visible holdfasts to give us any idea of what might have been there. Some ladders don't look like they belong there, but if they indeed came from this station, they may have been to access the roof. If, as I say, the radar head or radar antenna was on the roof. And there appears just to be one area of painted wall here, so we can still see the green paint, though not very much of it now. The green paint that was in this area. It doesn't look as if the whole wall was particularly painted that green, just that small area. Although the far, I wonder, it's hard to see whether it's algae or whether it is actually green paint. So the inside of this building may indeed have been painted. So yeah, I think this was probably the combined transmitter receiver building for the radar set, and that was up here on Nolsoy. So looking up at the roof here, it doesn't appear that there are any holdfasts for mounting the antenna, interestingly enough. So we do see the hole of a vent there. That may have been for venting equipment, but it's this lip. So the roof is angled slightly, and it's this lip on the far side that has me wondering. So in the lip there are a number of sockets for wood. We can see there's a nail there suggesting that there was something mounted. There was a wooden plank, for want of a better term, mounted just on that lip. And remember, inside we had the two holes which would be coming out somewhere down here and coming to this side. And if we look at how the earth bank for that blast protection comes around, it hugs the building the whole way around until it gets to here. Then it does this sort of dog leg and leaves this space clear. So depending on what equipment, and I'm still trying to find out exactly what equipment was mounted here. But actually, it looks like we have a bit of a concrete lip there that may be wood lined. So it's possible that in this part behind the building was actually part of that portable equipment. Perhaps it was a trailer mounted antenna. That trailer was effectively blocked in or bricked in to that area with the crew and the equipment operating out of the slightly more secure and safe building. Especially that these sites did become permanent sites, even though they had light equipment from the Air Ministry deployed. They did become permanent sites. So it's possible that the radar equipment was ancillary in a cabin or in a trailer behind that building. I would really love to try and find out, because as I say, every one of these sites I visit is slightly different, which is absolutely perplexing me, and it's very hard to interpret. And with that transmit receive building in the background, we come on to the second of only two light anti-aircraft positions that were at this radar station. Similar dimensions to the first one, however this one has had shuttering of corrugated iron on both the outside and the inside. And even better, we have the base. We have the base of that pole or post that would have supported that light anti-aircraft gun. It, by looking at it, would have been on a flat steel plate. We can see the 4 reinforcement spars out the corner of it. Walls about a foot thick. We can see, as I say, the corrugated iron on the inside, and the outside, actually looking at it, is not quite circular, and it's certainly not corrugated. So the outside has been used almost like a barrel with vertical planks of wood. So outside, vertical planks of wood, inside, corrugated iron. We have this wonderful light anti-aircraft gun position. And let's just take a moment to try and imagine what it would have been like. So maybe they had 8 minutes notice of an approaching aircraft. It may just be a single lone aircraft on a photo reconnaissance mission, of which we actually have lots of already digitised German aerial images ranging from 1942 all the way up to 1945, sorry, I think 44 was the last German sortie around the Faroes of the Faroe Islands. None that I can find of this that include this radar station. So they've had some advance warning. They've gone to the magazine. They've got out the 2 Bren guns. One team of 2, maybe 3 people has gone to the lower position. The second team has come up to this upper position. They've brought the boxes of magazines with them. They've mounted the machine gun and they've just sat waiting for the approach. Some of the photo reconnaissance missions were flown very low level, so it may be that maybe 50, 100 feet above the sea on a lovely day like this, they could start to hear the twin engines of the aircraft approaching. Comes into range, and yeah, then they open fire, not knowing what the aircraft's going to do, not knowing if the aircraft has spotted them. But at that moment, it's really just these two Bren guns, and almost as far as they're concerned, the might of the German Luftwaffe approaching. So I rarely consider, it sounds terrible, I rarely consider the people that man these stations, but coming somewhere like this, where really resupply would have been infrequent, when the weather closes in, they would really just feel like they're on their own. And we can see the lighthouse just down the bottom of the hill. So here, as I say, is the transmit receive building. I haven't at this location found any evidence of antenna bases. However, we're going to go over to this small building here in the distance and have a look. I'm not 100% convinced it was associated with, certainly with this phase of constructing the radar station. Quite often it's the context of the phasing is difficult. So the building over here could have been constructed 2-3 years after the main station here. So we're going to hike across this moorland and have a look at this building in the distance. And here we are at the final building that I think is worth looking at on Nolsoy. So if we have a look from the outside, it's a single cell building with a porch made of reinforced concrete, wooden shuttering, and when we get up close we see that it's got an aggregate of what looks like fine beach pebbles and so on. We've got, not windows, but we've got some vents at the top, at this side, or at this end, and along the 2 sides. So, and I'd mentioned before at the other building we've just been at that I didn't see any evidence of antennas. Well, certainly here, that's not the case. There absolutely is evidence. And there are, in fact, 2 wooden masts still on the ground. One still at its full height, and the other one has broken off. But if we step a little bit further back again, we see there are 3 concrete pads at the front. We can tell they're concrete because the central one has been constructed with concrete, and it seems to be the same visually, at least anyway, the same mix that has been used for the building. So 3 pads out the front, 2 antennas still standing, and depending how you interpret some of the lumps and bumps at the side, there may be in fact the basis of some more, or they may have been for supporting guy ropes. So of course, just because it had masts suggests it had antennas. Just because it had antennas doesn't necessarily mean that it was a radar station. It may have been a radio station, so it may have been a communications station. And we do know there were high frequency sites, there were medium frequency sites operating in the Faroes, as well as I believe there was a Darky VHF fixer service running from the Faroes as well, but that's more likely to have been operating from around the airfield. So here, small antennas, smaller generally means higher frequency. So we may have been talking about a VHF radio site here, or we could have been talking actually about a second type of radar. So there were two stations in the Faroes that operated both early warning air radar and also coastal defence radar that was fitted slightly later in the war. So, judging by the fact that this building was probably constructed slightly later in the war, it's visually different mix. It's also the same as one of the radar sites that I visited on one of the other islands on the southernmost tip of the Faroe Islands. Here we're all the way to the east, but in the southernmost tip was an identical building at the site of a radar station. Here's the one of the broken poles or broken masts. So let's have a look inside and see if we can get any clues about its function and operation. So here we are inside the single-celled building. We can see some of the formwork, some of the witness marks from the formwork when it was constructed. Interestingly, we have some wooden sparring around the outside. Now, almost impossible to tell whether this was original or not, but it certainly has been here for some time, and it looks like it may have been reinforced at a later stage. So perhaps some of this is original and some of it is later. And same up here, some wooden posts. So we have, curiously, we have this high level vent up here, which almost certainly was for ventilation and would have been louvered. But we have these small apertures down here. Now, it's hard to know, as I say, the floor level has probably been raised maybe a foot. I'm 5'10" and can just about look out of these as they are. So it's unlikely that unless the floor was raised, that they would have been for observation. However, it's compelling as to whether these would have been observation loopholes. Looking on the roof, we can see there's some, not quite yet, maybe tar paper. There certainly looks like some steel work in the roof there that has started to spoil and come off. That may be reinforcing, but it looks a bit thick for reinforcing. So we'll see if we can have a look up the roof and see if there's anything mounted. We have some tarred paper here, which almost looks like it was acting as a bit of a damp-proof course for the roof. But it may be that the wooden formwork, of which we can see some of the high-level formwork. So that was probably laid over the roof to stop the concrete sticking to it as it set. So these are likely actually just to be part of the construction process of forming the concrete. So yeah, anyway, stunning views. There's unfortunately not much we can tell from this building from looking on the inside. So yeah, back out to the outside, we can see there was maybe an air brick or some ventilation, maybe for some cables to come in, but there's no evidence of that at the low level. And then here we are at the far side. So yes, a curious little building, may indeed have housed some equipment and Oh, look, I think, oh, it's very hard. I always get excited, but it's probably just erosion. I thought this perhaps would have been some egress for cables. There's another, probably, as I say, it's probably an air brake. Now, there may have been a mechanical or electrical, there may have been a plinth on the inside, which we can't see because it's blocked over now. But certainly, we have masts likely to support antennas. In order to support equipment for the antennas, we're talking about some radio or radar equipment being housed in there. And that's really it. That concludes this this tour of the Nolsoy radio direction finding or radar station on the Faroe Islands. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.